Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today we're talking about different kinds of variegated, self-striping, self-color changing yarn. There's lots of options out there, and it really does affect what kind of patterns you can do and what will look good. And a lot of it is a judgment call, but a good chunk of it is just kind of understanding how color changing yarn sort of works and all the tons of options out there. Because color changing yarn, not gonna lie, kind of on a spectrum. Like so many things in real life is just like this weird spectrum. And some things kind of hard to figure out where they belong on a spectrum. So this is my opinion. And not gonna lie, I did a lot of work for this. I made so many swatches for this and the next video, which is all about yarn weights. I do also apologize for a lot of clearing my throat, and if I sound kind of nasally or throaty or froggy or something, I have a cold. I'm not as bad as I was a few days ago, but I did not wait until I was fully recovered because who knows how long that'll take. I do apologize for sounding gross, but don't worry, I'm going to cut out anything truly gross I do, such as coughing or hacking anything up. Now I am going to give you a heads up that a lot of the yarns and everything are different weights, and some of them are different fibers. I didn't want to redo a lot for the next video. I did redo some, but I didn't have to redo a lot. So the point isn't the size of the yarn. The point is the color. And I think that gets made perfectly clear. So let us start with solid colored yarn. So as you can see, this is solid yarn. It is all one color through the skein, no color changes. And when you look at the yarn itself, no color changes, no variance whatsoever. And then when you look at the swatch, everything looks pretty good, and everything actually came out very clear. This yarn has excellent stitch definition, and the garter stitch was really nice. It's honestly super soft and squishy. I did not expect to like this yarn, but dude, good yarn. And then the way you can always tell what a yarn's going to look like is, any color is going to show up the best in stockinette stitch, let's be honest. But here, look at these cables. You can see them very clearly. There's easy stitch definition. You can see the difference in texture between the puffy stitch and the background. Reverse stockinette stitch bits, these bits. And it comes across nice and clear. And even double crochet. Yeah, I did funky stuff on these. You can, by the way, double crochet straight out of knit stitches, just so as you know. That's a thing you can do. But the color looks really good. Everything being solid looks good. It looks as expected. Even on the back, you can see everything. And that's why I like working with solid colors. If you want to do color changes, you can choose when to do color changes. There's a lot more freedom with it and getting exactly what you want. If I want a color change right here in the middle, I can plan it so I can have a color change right here in the middle. Yes, that way you do wind up with more ends to weave in, but ultimately it winds up looking exactly the way you want it, with colors exactly where you want them. And there's lots of different techniques for like changing colors and everything. So this is always a good option if you're ever unsure of what to get for a project. Next on the spectrum is speckled yarn. Well, this is as close to speckled as I ever get. And as you can see, it looks primarily one color, with tiny little specks and little dashes, I guess, of a color, typically no more than a stitch or two. And as you can see, when you look at the strand itself, you can see the little speckles and everything, little bits and pieces of color. Yes, this is lace weight yarn. I know it's hard to see, but as you can see here, it does create a little bit more texture, though you can still see quite a bit of detail. So you can see the garter down here. Right here, pretty neat garter. You can always tell what something's really going to look like in stockinette stitch. Like, you can really see the color, and it really has a spot to shine. This is one of those types of yarns where texture will look different depending on how speckled and how much is going on in this yarn. But you can still see in pretty decent detail the cables. I did 4 of them because I think honestly the bigger issue is that this is much thinner yarn. But you can still see in pretty good detail the cables. They actually turned out quite nice. The texture doesn't get eaten or anything. And the double crochet doesn't look too weird. It looks a little bit like camouflage, I guess, but that might be unique to this yarn. This is an Easter jelly bean yarn that I dyed myself, and then I knit up these socks. These are Hermione's everyday socks. And as you can see, I mean, I had bigger splotches of color, but as you can see, the texture kind of gets eaten. You really can't tell. You can tell that there's texture, but you really can't see what the texture is or what the texture pattern is. You can see, though, that there is a difference between the plain stockinette and the texture. But you can see that there's a difference, and not all textures necessarily work on this. Next we have another lace weight yarn, but this is a tonal yarn. And this is a pretty heavily tonal yarn because as you can see, there's quite a bit of difference. What a tonal yarn is basically you have one color, or you might be just switching between tones. Like, you could have more of a bluish and more of a greenish tone. It's not necessarily between the dark shade of the tone and white. But as you can see, there are different tones of the same color in here. Now, this is heavily toned, so there's some quite big differences in tone, but some tonal yarns are a little bit less toned, so to speak. This one, you can still see garter pretty well, but it has these weird like lines because it's a funky thing that happens with garter is you're actually seeing the under loop and the top loop of the knit stitch on the other side. So you can wind up with some pretty funky lines, or this can just look pretty nice. Again, stockinette always looks good. Stockinette will work with just about any yarn, even thick and thin yarn. And as you can see, the tonalness, the color changes are really kind of eating away at the texture. So you can barely see, I mean, honestly, you can see the cables a little bit better in real life, but that's because you can actually touch them and you can kind of see a little bit better with your fingers. Like this one, even in real life with my good eyes going, this one gets eaten up pretty well. This one's the best to see. This one still gets eaten a little bit. And the crochet, it doesn't look too bad, but you can see that you're getting kind of rectangular blocks of color here. And depending on what you're going for, this may not be it. And of course, different tonals are going to appear different. And whenever you swatch, tonals can and different color changes can pool a little differently. Don't judge a large garment based on a small swatch. But yeah, that's tonal. Next, we're getting into some of the color changing yarns. So let's start with Ombre. So ombre, as you can see, is a slow color change. So this one goes from dark to lighter to lightest to slightly darker, slightly darker. This is a very slow color change. It's Red Heart Super Saver Ombre. As you can see, we didn't even get to a color change. We got some tonal notes where you have a couple of slightly lighter, like little patches that you can barely see on the camera. Trust me, they exist kind of in this section here. But we didn't even get to a full color change in this giant ass swatch. You can easily see all the different texture elements. The cool thing is, this is very gentle color changing. It's a very long time and a slow and subtle color change. So you can do just about any texture you want. This was actually made to be color changed in like blankets or sweaters. So you can see a very slow color change. But yes, this will look nice with just about anything. And this is some self-striping yarn. And as you can see, they're pretty thick color changes, but they're not the thickest. This one will really depend on the width of the project you're doing. Like if you're doing a skinny little scarf or something, is going to be different than if you're doing a bigger shawl. And that's even going to change at a different pace to if you're doing a sweater or something. So just be aware of that it's not necessarily going to have these thick stripes. These thick stripes only happen for this wide of a swatch. And as you can see, it doesn't look too bad here in the garter, but the back of the garter didn't work out. Now I lucked out on this piece that all the garter kind of happened in a decent place. Like you can see that it happened, the color change happened basically right here. No, it happened right here. Right there, this spot right here. So I lucked out and the color change happened and I could just choose that this would be the back. But if it happened again, it could be the front, because if you look right here, you have a little bit of crisscrossing of colors. And again, on stockinette, it looks just fine. It's always going to be, you know, funkier with the color change on the back of this, so that's fine. Now the issue with this, you can totally see the texture, but it didn't happen. The color change didn't happen in a good spot here. Like it would have been nicer if it happened up here in the middle or down here or up here above it, but this is just sort of a weird spot. And look at this double crochet. You wind up, like right here worked out pretty good. You only wound up with like 1.5 stitches that were in the lighter color, but you went from the green to the purple. Yeah, this is kind of a minty green in real life. My colors are not coming true on here. It switched colors right here, and you wind up with this just weird jagged, and then this one stitch that's like half. And it looks kind of funky. So just be aware that that will happen. You do not have control over where your colors change on this kind of yarn. There is a new yarn that hit the market a month or two ago. Red Heart is doing granny square self-changing yarn, and it's having a lot of issues like this, because if you don't have exactly the perfect tension, you're not getting the color change exactly where you need it to on the granny square. And it's just being itself, let's be honest. Next is a true variegated yarn. And as you can see, the color changes are very quick. They are a decent length. Like if you look at this, you know, you can see that it changes colors in a few inches. There is a thing called planned color pooling, I don't know if this is one of those yarns you can really do that with, but that is always an option because this variegated yarn has quick color changes and it can look a hot mess, especially like it doesn't even look good, I don't think, on the garter stitch. Obviously, the best turns out to be stockinette because it's simple and basic. Your texture gets really kind of funky and quite a bit eaten. It's hard to see the cables. More subtle textures are totally going to get eaten up by this. And then the double crochet looks very blocky, which can go for something. Some people really like this, but that's just a matter of preference. It's not my thing. Now, it can look pretty neat, especially if you do like fan stitches or something. This can look pretty neat and interesting. But it is really a matter of preference and opinion on some of this. But I wouldn't do too many textures. My personal preference would be the stockinette. And last but not least, Barber Pole yarn. I call it a Barber Pole because it kind of has that striped look, because each one of the plies is a different color and it's done a little differently. This is super thick yarn. This is also, by the way, a very lovely yarn to knit with and crochet with. Like this Hometown yarn, I've never used it before. I'm not much of a thick yarn person, but you can see that Barber Pole stripe in really easily on this. And here we go. Now, you can't really tell that it's garter stitch, but the garter stitch kind of works out because there is an evenness to this color. For all that it is super, super color changing, there is a sort of regularity to the colors. There's a little bit of like pooling with the dark colors to the light colors, but it's not that bad. Garter, I think, actually worked out pretty well. And stockinette, you know, you really can't see the stitch work too well from a distance, but up close it still looks pretty good. This, however, I mean, this is a giant cable, but a lot of different textures are just going to get eaten up. Like, you can see this texture, but only because the yarn is thick. It's definitely something you're going to want to swatch and try. It doesn't look too bad in crochet. So, what is the point of all of this? Honestly, the point is you need to try something out. Just realizing that the busier a yarn is, the less likely it is that it will look good on texture. You can always try it out. Just don't be surprised if it doesn't look the way you think that it should. And, you know, sometimes you can create something that looks really nice. You know, even if you can't see the texture, it still looks nice with the texture, you know. So it really is a matter of what you're doing, the thickness of the yarn, the fiber, the drape. You know, there's so much that goes into choosing a yarn for a pattern. You get different things depending on the situation, and it's always worth trying. And hey, if you don't like it, that's okay. You just pick another yarn for the project, or pick a project that has a little bit less intricacy to it for that yarn. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Please appreciate my swatching ability, and happy crafting. Bye.